Daddy always bought corsages for Mother and me, fresh flowers, for Easter time. Here I am in Parkersburg about age 10. And Cubby and Sutton were still in love. Dressing up was still fun for me. My grandfather, Poppy, who lived with us in Parkersburg after my grandmother died, used to meet my earliest boyfriends at the door and tell them jokes until I was ready to go out. Besides apples, rhubarb grew in our backyard in Parkersburg every year. I loved it in sauce and in pies. I am ringing the bell from a locomotive mounted on a pole outside our neighbor's garage. Mr. Matheny, the man who lived there, had been a B&O railroad engineer. I had a birthday party luncheon served in the backyard by my parents. My parents devised all sorts of games for us to play. I was 11. The driving vacations continued. It was a very all-American leisure choice in the 1950s. This was the annual trip to Baltimore to visit Aunt Bonnie, probably in June to avoid the polio season of the hot months. Aunt Bonnie and I are shown here. On another automobile trip, we stopped at Saddleback Mountain in West Virginia, near where Abraham Lincoln's mother, Nancy Hanks, was born. I was already a history buff. Later we drove again to Baltimore. These are gleaming, scrubbed white steps, once typical of the many row houses in the city. By the time I'm 14 or 15, we are on longer vacation drives. This one was all the way to Florida. Daddy's fishing gear always went with us. I was in my element in Florida for a week of beaching and swimming under palm trees. I really felt like a teenager. It was one of our best family times. Daddy even tried surf fishing. My parents also had to show me Atlantic City, where they had so much fun before I was born. In the summer of 1960, we were again on the motel circuit, this time to see Daddy's two widowed aunts, Harriet and Kay, his mother's sisters. They lived in St. Louis, Missouri. Kennedy was running for president, and the aunts asked him if he thought it was a good idea to have a Catholic for president. He did. Of course, the Holiday Inn there had a swimming pool. Aunt Bonnie and Uncle Virgil were there with us for part of this visit. Then we actually drove to traffic-choked New York City to visit my half-sister Anne and her family. She had married Ed Fisher, a freelance cartoonist who sold mainly to the New Yorker magazine. They showed us Chinatown, which Mother found too unsanitary for her tastes. This is a tugboat in New York Harbor. My father had arranged a tour of the harbor for us on such a boat through his friendship with Betty Harris, a wealthy philanthropist in Parkersburg who served on boards and committees with him. Betty was the recipient for life of the profits of the Moran tugboat line that had a monopoly of the work in the harbor at the time. We were treated like kings and queens and saw the skyline from the water. It was such a thrill to see the Statue of Liberty from this boat. We also visited the Guggenheim Museum in New York with the famous spiral walkway inside. This unique building was still very new. Daddy loved New York. We saw several shows while I was there with him. I was 17 that summer of 1961. This swimming pool was in Hollidaysburg, Pennsylvania, that same summer, at a country club where Uncle Jack belonged. He had moved his family with 3 children to Altoona, Pennsylvania, and my grandfather was living with them there for a time. Unfortunately, he died there later that year. By my senior year in high school, 1961 to 62, my parents built a modern brick house on 1 level. We acquired a small black poodle puppy we named George. That summer, I worked at the newspaper for the first time, mostly writing obituaries. After work ended at 3 p.m., Daddy liked to drive over to Vito Lake in Ohio if the weather was nice and fish for bluegills from a rowboat. I often went along and read. Sometimes we took George. Mother worked until 5 o'clock, so Daddy cooked dinner. After that, there were many more comings and goings by airplane, car, and bus as I went off to college at Ohio State University for the next 5.5 years. In my last year of graduate school, 1967, I met David Patterson. We were married the following June. Here, if you look closely, you can see David and me on a visit to my family that first year of our married life when we still lived in Columbus, Ohio. Everything that came after this is a different story. The movie camera was put away. It had done its job recording all this awesome love. Now you can have a taste of it with you forever.